Enter the world of forensic science, the science of crime, where a suspect's guilt or innocence can hang on a single piece of evidence. Most murders are committed by people who know their victims. That fact alone gives investigators a head start. But what happens when killer and victim are total strangers? Then motive and opportunity can barely be guessed at. There are either no suspects or far too many. When that happens, Exhibit A becomes the mind of the killer. Madeleine Picard rarely went to university bars, but it's the beginning of the school year and the work hasn't piled up yet. Around midnight, a guy asks her and her friend, Celine, to dance. Celine can tell he's more interested in Madeleine. Besides, it's getting late. Celine wants to leave. He wants Madeleine to stay. She can't decide. Sometimes it's the small decisions that make the biggest difference. Responding to an anonymous call, police find Madeleine's body around 5 the next afternoon, 16 hours after her friend left on the bus.
The base of your case is your crime scene. You have to be there on the crime scene to get the feeling from the crime scene. Murder has a language you have to interpret.
The problem is, this crime scene isn't talking as much as detectives would like. One of the reasons is the weather.
There's an old expression in homicide: your victim can only be killed once, but your crime scene can be killed 1,000 times. It had rained throughout the night, so any physical evidence that would have been left on the body, around the body, was all washed away.
As with all homicides, the body is sent to the morgue to be autopsied. A forensic pathologist will dissect and examine the body internally and externally. What detectives learn is that the cause of death was asphyxia. Her larynx has been broken, likely the result of strangulation. And she has been sexually assaulted with an unknown blunt object. Who was Madeleine Picard, and how had she come to this terrible fate? From their interview with Celine, detectives hear about the guy from the club.
Her friend said he was 6 foot, tanned, well-spoken, well-dressed, well-educated by his vocabulary. And that is the last time that her friend seen her was standing at the entranceway, talking. He was the key guy we had to find, because he was the one who could give the last moments of what happened before they left.
Police are definitely interested in talking with him, but no one seems to know his identity or where to find him. So with the help of eyewitness accounts, a police artist prepares a composite picture. Despite front page coverage and a barrage of tips, the mystery man remains a mystery. The case is no closer to being solved. Then police get a break. She was riding her bike past the church just after 1 a.m. on the night of the murder. She said she'd been too scared to come forward, that her boyfriend told her not to get involved.
While she was passing an opening in the hedge, she seen a couple struggling. She didn't stop because further on there was 3 or 4 people waiting at the bus stop. She justified that one, it was a couple that were fooling around, or second, if the girl needed help, the people were coming from the bus stop, so everything would be okay.
Police now knew that Madeline's assailant had attacked her near a gap in the hedge. This was some 70 meters from where he apparently rendered her unconscious by hitting her head on the cement path near the church. The witness also noted that the man was wearing a striped sweater. A year passed. Detectives still couldn't find the mystery man. New cases began to demand more attention.
We had a picture of the victim taped to our desk. And when we were between cases, when we had any spare time, that picture, that victim was staring at us, saying, "Don't take a break, work some more on my case."
Detectives needed a fresh perspective, so they turned to one of the latest behavioral sciences, psychological profiling. RCMP Inspector Ron McKay was the first Canadian police officer trained in psychological profiling at the FBI Academy.
Investigators have one of 2 major problems. One, either they have too many suspects or they have no suspects at all. What profiling will do for them in a case like that is it'll help them focus on the most likely suspects when they have a large pool of suspects, or alternatively, surface a suspect from the general population when they have no suspects at all. By describing a personality type, not an individual, but a personality type, what kind of person would do this kind of crime?
It was now up to the profiler Ron McKay to help police with Exhibit A, the mind of the killer. The first thing a profiler does is to gather all of the pertinent information that investigators have compiled to this point: crime scene photos, investigative reports, witness statements, autopsy material, a map of Montreal, the weather report for the night of the murder, and crime rates for the area near the murder site.
What we try and do is paint a verbal picture of a personality. We don't describe the face, we describe the personality behind that face.
But to get inside the killer's mind, nothing can take the place of walking the ground.
I can put myself in a crime scene and I can get a better feel for how the offender felt at the time of his crime. Just by the juxtaposition of all the physical things that no one picture can take in. I've had crime scenes that I just could not understand from the pictures, but once I walked in, then I understood. It's more of a feeling. It's the art part of profiling.
You going to mug me?
I'm not gonna mug you.
Is that gorgeous or what, eh?
And I believe I can run a decent marathon.
Thank you very much.
Download Veely now.
According to McKay, sexual predators are driven by violent sexual fantasies that have been building up inside them for years.
I don't know exactly what his fantasy was, but I have an understanding his fantasy was anger-based. He felt angry, but at the same time he felt inadequate. Bring those two together and you have an element of frustration. He must have felt a compulsion to commit the crime.
The break in the hedge is a risky location for an assailant to make his move. What did the choice of this high-risk location say about the assailant?
Many people have similar fantasies, but they choose not to act out on them. He chose to act out on his, and that in itself tells us something about his impulsivity and his lack of control over his emotions.
But there's another important piece of the puzzle: victimology, studying the victim herself. McKay asked the detectives to assemble a file documenting Madeleine Picard's character and lifestyle. By getting to know the victim, McKay can better understand the interplay between the victim and her assailant. The picture that emerges of Madeleine Picard is that she was a quiet woman, particular about whom she dated. She drank very little and was not in the habit of frequenting bars. Not the type of woman who got sexually involved with a man on a short acquaintance. Madeleine Picard was also very self-assured and unafraid of walking alone at night.
The major part of profiling within the crime scene is evaluating victim-offender action-reaction. And when you have a deceased victim, there's nobody can answer those questions definitively, but by profiling, we can arrive at a logical theory as to what happened.
McKay believed that the assailant did not have control of his victim during the initial stages of the attack. He speculated that she escaped temporarily and there was a struggle. She was recaptured near the place where the earrings and the watch were found and rendered unconscious.
The way he dealt with the victim suggested he had less than full control over his somewhat petite victim. He's not only socially, sexually inadequate, he was probably physically inadequate as well.
Madeleine Picard's killer had attacked from the rear, which suggests an assailant who is insecure with women and uncertain of his ability to control his interaction with them. He lacks confidence and self-esteem, and he's a coward.
I felt that the offender in this case would not be the kind of individual who would approach a girl in a public place with another young lady and ask her to dance. He would observe her dancing, and the behavior of the young man she was dancing with was diametrically opposed to that personality type.
After writing up his report, McKay met with the Montreal detectives to discuss his profile of the killer. One thing he emphasized was that profiling did not have the level of certainty of other kinds of forensic science.
With Ron McKay's profiling, he was convinced, 80 to 90%, that that was not our killer. So we were looking for a white male with a mental age, late 20s, early 30s, who was a loner, who could not take responsibility, who worked at a very menial job, in and out of work, who had a rough childhood, who was not good in communication with women, probably lived on his own, wouldn't talk, wouldn't have confidence in anybody. During this time period, we'd get a suspect that looked really good. We were all on a high. And then it ended up he wasn't near the scene or anything, and then we'd go down the other side of our roller coaster.
In December of 1994, a few months after McKay completed his profile, 35-year-old Gerald DeVille was arrested on a charge of rape in Sherbrooke, Quebec. His picture was broadcast on local TV, and a woman called police reporting that he resembled a man who raped her in Montreal in 1991. 2 Montreal detectives were sent to interview DeVille, but he refused to tell them anything. Afterwards, however, he told his cellmate he'd been worried that they'd come to see him about the murder of Madeleine Picard. The cellmate called the Montreal Homicide Division and tipped them off.
So my partner took down the information, and he told me, he said, we have to go to Sherbrooke Prison, information number 735, it just come in. So I said, fine. I said, here we go up the roller coaster again.
Could this be their man? McKay's psychological profile also suggested how best to interview this kind of suspect.
I felt that this offender would be more inclined to talk about his crime if he felt he was talking to someone that understood how he felt about things. So it was a case of establish some rapport and understanding with the offender rather than take a hard accusatory approach.
So before we went into the Sherbrooke Prison, we decided that we're going to have a couple of interviews with this guy. So we went into the prison. The first interview was just to meet him, to see what type of person he was, to see his makeup, to see if he was a talker or a listener. So we talked to him. We told him why we were there. He asked us not to make any notes, that he talked to us. So we talked about everything.
As DeVille talked, detectives realized that he matched the profile. He'd had a short, unsatisfactory marriage and was divorced. He was hostile towards women, believing that he couldn't attract them because of his looks, and that they were only interested in money. He had a menial job working in the kitchen of a fast food restaurant, and as the profile suggested, he was unable to accept responsibility and quit when he was offered a promotion.
When we left, my partner gave him his card and said, if you want to talk about our victim, said, give us a call. So he replied, I'm not ready yet. When I'm ready, I'll call you.
For the second interview, detectives deliberately chose to share a meal with DeVille, part of the bonding process they hoped would encourage him to talk. During this interview, they established that DeVille had traveled by bus on various occasions to Montreal, but he still wasn't ready to talk about Madeleine Picard. They promised to return for another interview.
Everything fit into Ron McKay's profile. So that made this even more exciting.
They then obtained a warrant to record DeVille's conversation with his cellmate. 2 days later, they have an audio tape of DeVille talking to his cellmate about killing Madeleine Picard. But a confession to a fellow inmate can be problematic in court. They want him to confess to them.
So the third time we went back, which was the 21st of December, 1994, my partner and I came up with a strategy that he'd go in and talk to him first. If he didn't start to confess to the crime, then I'd come in and play the tape that we had out of the body pack. So my partner was in there for about 35, 40 minutes, and I came by, and he called me in. He said, come on in.
DeVille had just confessed to the murder. They took out paper and pencil. According to DeVille, this is what happened to Madeleine Picard on September 9th, 1992. He was in the club that night. Of all the women there, something about Madeleine Picard caught his attention and held it. He could taste it. He followed her out and hid. When he saw her start to walk, he followed. He ducked behind the hedge, waiting to pounce. At the gap in the hedge, he grabbed her. She struggled, escaped. He recaptured her and hit her head against the concrete walkway, then sexually assaulted her. The confession lasted 4 hours, and by the end, detectives had a 19-page formal declaration.
Once the declaration was finished, myself and my partner went outside in the parking lot to get into our vehicle. We looked at each other, and we didn't say a word for an hour. We were both so drained of adrenaline and emotion. We both had wet eyes. We were almost to the point of tears that we were so happy that this case was finally closed.
The Montreal detectives credit McKay's psychological profile with playing a significant role in gaining DeVille's confession.
I think police are becoming more and more scientific, and they're not looking for black and white answers all the time, as we did when I was a young investigator. They understand that the human nature is very complex, and the certainties we would like to have are seldom available. So they settle for probabilities, and used intelligently, they can be extremely powerful investigative tool.
In a world where Madeleine Picard, a vibrant, intelligent young woman, can be brutally murdered by a total stranger, understanding the killer's mind can be the crucial piece of the puzzle. The stories in Exhibit A are based on actual cases.